Hey guys, Jason Sheftel here. It is a little cold, but we're here for another Olympics update for the Beijing Winter Olympics 2022, which starts in early February, and it is going to be a real show for everybody. Beijing has been trying to create another extravaganza like 2008, but unfortunately, a couple things are really hampering this whole show. Basically, kind of like award ceremonies in Hollywood and all sorts of other grand festive galas, COVID is kind of destroying a lot of these plans. And you could check out other videos I've done. I talk about it, and people are talking about it all over the internet anyway. But China's COVID bubble is in the process of bursting right now as we speak. So Omicron has been naturally entering the country, and China's whole policy since the pretty early days of the pandemic in 2020 has been to have no COVID in China, right? It's pretty famous at this point, zero tolerance policy, which I've also done some videos on. Basically said that this isn't going to work. Omicron especially is way, way, way too transmissible for any of that to really work, but it doesn't really matter. China is wedded to this strategy, and well, Omicron is bursting this bubble, and it's streaming throughout all sorts of Chinese cities. So right now it's spreading everywhere, and over 20 million people are back in lockdown in China. And that's not that many people when you think about how many people were in a lockdown early on in 2020. But basically, China is playing Omicron whack-a-mole right now throughout the country, trying to get a handle on this virus that you really can't get a handle on in this way. It is just this is the most transmissible disease humanity has ever really encountered. This is worse than measles, which measles, you can get measles just by being in the same general vicinity as people. So all of the precautions that we're pretty used to taking aren't working very well, and that's why we're seeing crazy numbers everywhere. And like I've said before, everyone is trying to adjust to this new reality. The recent report or recent interview with the FDA director, in that she basically said, or the acting FDA director basically said, everyone's going to get this. And she's equating it with a natural disaster and things like that. And that is kind of where the U.S. government is, and it's kind of where a lot of other countries are if you're trying to be at least a part of the modern interconnected world. So in China, if there's no COVID in China, and China was just the hermit kingdom, and nobody else was having any contact with China, nothing had to come in, nothing had to come out, no goods, no people, no products, no anything, then this could maybe work, right? You could just wait for this to blow through the rest of the world, theoretically, and then kind of wait it out. But the truth is, we're part of a global interconnected world here. And even that policy, like even if you wait it out and say, oh, we'll just beat back Omicron and we'll just kind of not beat it back, we'll just keep it beyond our borders. What do you do when it gets into your borders, right? In China and around the world, the plan was always vaccines, but China's vaccine doesn't work against Omicron, and who knows how many years it might take for China to make one and create one, test one, and distribute one that does work against Omicron, and who knows if it will work against the next one. So that is kind of the major problem here. And what the government is doing is it's basically kind of like with tech and like with all sorts of other areas in life in China, it is basically just cracking down on things. That is kind of the go-to strategy to deal with any problem. It is basically the hammer is a crackdown, and every problem is a nail in China. And this wouldn't be a big problem for the rest of the world. I mean, it actually is a huge problem. It's a problem for economics and manufacturing and all the problems with supply chains that we have. There's already a lot of manufacturers in China, particularly a lot of auto manufacturers, that are having enormous trouble right now due to ports are a really common place where this happens. So Tianjin is one of the major cities that's under lockdown right now, and Tianjin is one of the major ports in northern China. It's basically the port of Beijing is a way to think about it, although it's a major city. That is kind of how it developed originally anyway. But that is a place that things come through, right? Including viruses, people, goods, and viruses come through ports. And China is a global export center, and it needs these ports to function to basically get the currency and revenue and everything that it needs to fund a lot of these coastal enterprise zones. So that is a real problem. But the other more immediate or looming problem is just the Olympics, right? This is really a perfect storm for the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, which everyone had kind of known this would be a problem. I also have a couple of videos about this Olympics because I've just feel like I've been watching a slow motion train wreck as this approached, not only with the boycotts and all the political stuff that's going on around it, but you just knew starting a month ago in the middle of December that Omicron was going to invade these Olympics. And this is really bad, right? So there's all the economic stuff, the shutdowns and the manufacturing, the port shutdowns and the manufacturing problems. But then there is just this gala event, right? This is like a corporate party or some other big show your face, strut your stuff sort of event. And China loves this sort of thing. It is how it communicates its grandeur and status to the rest of the world. And the Olympics were part of that type of agenda. And that's what it was in 2008. That's what it's supposed to be in 2022. And honestly, it was also supposed to be a bit of a, here is the COVID king, right? China was the place early on in the 2020. And in 2020, it looked like, oh, China was the place that managed to get a handle on COVID. Everyone else was really messing up. And yeah, there was early parts of that, but this is a multi-stage, dynamic event, right? This isn't just one thing. It is not one small period. It's an ongoing problem that you have to deal with continuously and you have to adapt to continuously. And that is definitely where China has failed. But the Olympics were, the part of the reason they went on with this, they were thinking, oh, this is a great way to show off how amazing China is. Like, if you remember a while ago, there was a big image of a huge like pool party in Wuhan, which was just there to show, oh, look, there you could have thousands of people surrounded by water and splashing around and laughing in a enclosed space because there's no COVID here, no viruses. Everything is all peachy and healthy and beautiful in China. And it would have been really nice for the Communist Party if that impression was still there. If in 2022, the whole world would be a mess and China would still be pristine and COVID-free, it would have been quite a coup in a propaganda sense for the Communist Party. But that is not the way it looks anymore. I mean, China is no longer the COVID queen, right? This is not a place where you look to think, oh, wow, this is exactly how things should be done. There are massive systemic problems spreading throughout China because of all these shutdowns that it's doing. And it's shutting down key nodes that make its economy function, that make all the businesses and business operations going on in China viable. So that's a sort of longer term problem. And it just hasn't figured all of this out. And a really, really major issue has just been, well, first, the vaccines don't work and there's no sort of public health strategy beyond preventing the virus from getting in the country. And then once the virus is in the country, that's bad. But what's worse is that China had wedded itself, the government has wedded itself to this public health guru image. It was trying to sell its people the fact that, look, the Communist Party is able to basically make China healthier and safer and more wholesome and well than the rest of the world can do. No one else can handle COVID except for the great Chinese Communist Party. But that no longer holds. And it's not only no longer holding, it's going to break down just when the Olympics are happening. It's going to break down just when everyone is there to supposedly see how great China is with COVID, right? So at that moment where China was going to show the world, look how amazing, how utterly amazing our COVID response has been. You can just walk around the country, nothing matters. There's no mask, you don't need anything. It's so beautiful and pristine and free and clean. Well, that's not going to happen. And we're going to have to watch actually how the party sort of allows this to be seen by the rest of China and all that. There's going to be a huge propaganda effort to keep that down for people who are interested in that stuff. But more importantly, this is sort of a really, really bad coming out party. So like in those other videos I describe how China wanted this to be 2008 redo, where basically this would be a giant second coming out party, a quinceañera or something for China after 2008, which was a grand success in the Communist Party's eyes. The 2022 Olympics would be a grand success. Look how much farther China has come, and look how well it managed to handle yet another crisis better than the West. So really soon after the Beijing Summer Olympics in 2008, there was the financial crisis around the world, and a lot of people looked at China and thought, wow, look, it managed to handle that much better than the West, which once again floundered in this economic crisis like it appears to be floundering in the current public health crisis. Now, there's obviously way more to that, but the image is very important. People have to remember that there is basically a cabinet-level position in the Chinese government that deals with propaganda. It actually used to be called the Propaganda Bureau before some modern image consultant in the party decided maybe we should change the name, and they changed it to like the basically like the publicity department, but it is functionally the exact same thing. So the Winter Olympics start in early February, and right now we're in the middle of January, and COVID isn't even at its peak, and it's definitely not at its peak in China. So right now there's going to be 2 or 3 weeks where China is going to be trying to do every single thing it can to blunt Omicron, but we'll see. I mean, it is theoretically possible they could keep it up for a couple weeks, but who knows? This is a extremely contagious virus. It's, like I said, the most contagious thing ever, basically. And trying to get a handle on this is really, really tough, and it requires massive disruption. So let's say China does manage to kind of tamp things down in the next couple weeks. That's going to happen by playing whack-a-mole with your society, right? Well, by shutting down and preventing large swaths of your country from functioning. And that is not a good long-term strategy. It doesn't take much geopolitical genius or insight to think, hey, maybe you got to do something else, right? Like right now, I think the UK just put out a live with COVID policy, or it's a planning to do so. Also, all sorts of countries are basically accepting that in one way or another, whether they sort of have it as an official policy or they're just sort of stumbling into it, or they're sort of currently trying to protect their hospital system and their healthcare system while knowing that COVID is, at least Omicron, is going to kind of just rip through the population. That is where we are. But China isn't accepting that whole stance, right? It is still clinging to this zero tolerance policy. And China is so big that if Omicron really did finally get through, there's very little immunity in the Chinese population because the vaccine wasn't very good, and then COVID was tamped down early on in the pandemic, although it did get farther than was acknowledged. The truth is, it also didn't get through at least 1 billion people. It wasn't that large of a spread. This is now a very different situation. If it did manage to get out of control, right? If Omicron actually, in the next couple of weeks, gets completely out of control in China, that would easily look like one of the worst public health disasters for the Communist Party in quite a while, because it would go against everything it's been trying to create as a narrative. It would look far worse even than a lot of other countries around the world. So right now, China is caught between its need to look impressive and maintain face and the reality, the brutal, terrible reality of its crumbling COVID policy. And in general, the Chinese Communist Party does not tend to respond well to these sorts of things, these really, really dynamic political events that require a combination of messaging and policy changes at once. This is really not something the Chinese government is structured to handle very well. They do more of a combined top-down propaganda and policy push binge kind of operation. It's very different, and it's really, really tough for China to do. I mean, this is part of the thing where if you're actually a government that has to stumble and muddle and miserably try and make your way through the really tough democratic politics with cameras and TV stations and everyone watching and monitoring your every move. When you have to do that, you kind of have a slightly better ability to deal with the kind of combined messaging and policy changes that are often needed for things like this, for these sort of continuous, long, necessarily adaptive events. But that's not what China does well. And what's even worse and galling, typically, for the Chinese Communist Party is that Japan just had the Olympics. So one reason it does not want to cancel the Olympics, which a lot of people said, hey, maybe you just cancel it, get rid of all this whole problem just right away, just do that, get rid of it. Japan didn't cancel the Olympics, And China does not like to be outclassed or to be seen as unable to accomplish something that Japan could, at a very basic level. And that's not good. But the truth is, if one thing Japan didn't do is all these lockdowns, it didn't quite have the same policy as China. It actually didn't have the best Olympics either. But this perfect storm that's hitting China is pretty unique, and it's once more just a typical result of basically China's go-to strategy to deal with the modern world and the modern challenges that are kind of impinging on it from every side. So it's a disaster of its own making. And, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I thank you again for watching. And if you liked it, please like it so more people can see it. If you really like this or any other videos, consider subscribing and then hit the notification button to make sure you don't miss any videos that get posted. And with that, I'm Jason Sheftel, and